podcast where each week we look at news stories from around the world through a global business lens. I'm your host, Michelle Evans, digital specialist at the World Trade Center Institute. And today we are tackling a story that has dominated news coverage for months: Palestine. This is obviously a sensitive topic for a whole host of reasons. So we're going to focus our coverage today on a narrow part of this ongoing topic: the recognition of Palestine as a state. So, whereas recently, Ireland, Spain, and Norway announced that they will formally recognize the existence of a Palestine state. Walk me through what this means both practically and symbolically. Like when one country formally recognizes another, what changes in that relationship?
Okay. Always fun to work on a hard subject. So, what I saw as a largely coordinated announcement by these three countries is really totally a symbolic move at this point.
Okay.
Giving the Palestinians, some level of elevated political and international legitimacy. So that's really the net of this at this point. Any formalized recognition would take time and needs to get sorted out. And um, I struggle on this whole topic and have for years. I mean, this has been going on for decades, so through my
Right.
entire career. So, anything practical like meeting the conditions of statehood under international law is
Hmm.
going to take time, and I had to go back to my like international studies in college to like, okay, what are the conditions, right? There's four fundamental conditions that includes having a defined territory, which is
Okay.
in dispute, right?
Hmm.
Having a permanent population, which is probably reasonably met,
Hmm.
having an established government, which is
Yeah.
again, debatable, right? And includes a defined territory, which clearly is in dispute, significantly. So I don't think, either side could argue that those four are not met or met, and
Hmm.
that's the root of the problem. So getting to statehood, I think is a far reach. And so I think that this, even though it's a narrow part of the topic, especially when you have a war going on, is the fundamental root of this.
Right.
Is what do the Palestinians? But we have the Kurds and others that are in similar situation.
So most of the world currently recognizes a Palestine state. As of this recording, it's 145 of 193 member states of the United Nations that recognize it as a sovereign nation. Right now, primary holdouts: the United States, Canada, Mexico, Australia, and many of our Western European allies. With three of the EU countries now recognizing Palestine, does that put pressure on the other EU companies?
So yeah, I mean it's not all EU, but yeah, the three countries.
Mm-hmm.
So now we can get into the broader, what's been going on in Israel and Gaza, right? With the the attack by Hamas, and then the Israeli retaliation, and all that's been going on there, and you know. These three countries, and in their statements, when I went and listened to them and read about them, again came back to this: okay, we're going to do this now to change the dynamic, to put pressure on Israel specifically and the international community to get some energy behind moving to some kind of negotiated peace, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
negotiated settlement. And we've had a long tradition within what I would call kind of the Western powers and their allies, that's only going to happen, this recognition of Palestine as a state, until there is a negotiated settlement,
Mm-hmm.
right, that has those four conditions met. That's been the position. So we're starting to see cracks in that position because of all that's going on, and political pressure around the globe. And that's why we're here today.
And you mentioned those four conditions.
Mm.
So, what does that political process look like to recognize them? Like, if the United States decided, the president, for example, decided to just open relations with Palestine, like, does Congress need to get involved, or how would that work?
Yeah, it's actually interesting because the short answer is the President of the United States has the authority to recognize a foreign state.
Okay.
Now, would that president do that unilaterally? No. Right. So, at a minimum, within the executive branch, they would be, conferring with the State Department and the National Security Council and others around this decision to do that. And I cannot even imagine that there would not be a consultation with Congress, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then, like the Senate Select Committee on Foreign Relations and the House Committee on that, would be briefed, consulted, discussed, may or may not agree, and the president could, continue on or take their counsel and not go forward, right? So, but
Mm-hmm.
the answer is the president can make that determination.
Wow. I did not know that. Um, so I'm assuming that one of the main reasons for the United States not recognizing Palestine is due to our relationship with Israel. With yeah. So what would change between the U.S., Israel, and Palestine if the U.S. did recognize them?
So first off is yes, clearly we're not doing this because of our unique and important relationship with Israel.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. was right on the heels of in 1948 of when Israel declared their sovereignty, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
were the first nation to back them up, and then we've been a major ally of theirs, they're the only functioning democracy in the Middle East, right? So they've been a very
Mm-hmm.
important ally. So that's the backdrop of why we are so tied and supportive of Israel. Um, I was surprised. I don't know when it was, few months ago, or maybe at some point in this process since October, there was discussion in the State Department about, what are some of the options, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I looked through that, I didn't see any like hard thing that says we're going to, one is to recommend that the president recognize Palestine as a state. I didn't see that. What I did see, and I can see this as kind of a tiptoe, is to say what we're going to do is we're going to have a pathway declared, some pathway for Palestine to be recognized as a
Mm-hmm.
state, and pathway to recognition kind of thing, and so I could see that as a way to kind of address some of the pressure and frustrations within the U.S. domestic political
Mm-hmm.
scene as well as internationally. But again, I'm not sure how much different that is from a negotiated solution to get to those four conditions to be a state. So
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking, like, what exactly would this pathway look like, or what would it consist of?
it would consist of rhetoric and cover.
Hmm.
And I again, this. I think a lot of people, myself included, that this situation and the current, kind of crosswire activities that are going on between Saudi and the Arabs and the U.S. and Israel and all this, from the Oslo Accords to today, right? Through most all the presidents have been involved in trying to sort this out and support some negotiated settlement. That this horrific situation that's going on would turn into a catalyst to a solution. I'm still holding a glimmer of hope, but it's a very difficult, for many reasons, and we can potentially talk about them, of why
Hmm.
it's been we've been eluded getting to that solution.
So we obviously don't have time to tackle the entire history and relationship between Israel and Palestine. But I do want to ask, a majority of the countries that recognize the Palestinian state first did so between November 1988 and May 1989. Was there a significant event or something that happened to cause like this initial burst of recognition?
Sure. um,
Hmm.
Probably festered since about 1974 in the UN, but in November, I don't have the date, but the November 1988 is when the Palestinian Liberation Organization declared Palestinian statehood.
Hmm.
Right, so they went forcefully and made that declaration, and following that, then there was just this extensive diplomatic and international effort by the PLO in getting countries to recognize that this what they've declared, that they would support that. And
Hmm.
it was more than, I guess, about 70 countries. I guess that would be the burst, right? And it's like
Hmm.
half of the ones that are there today,
Yeah.
by the in that year following, signed up to agreeing and that they would recognize Palestine as a state.
So the US in the past has supported a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine. Can you give
Hmm.
us a brief understanding of that stance, and do our allies share that stance as well?
Yes, I would say through the arc of this, maybe less so during the Trump presidency, but I would say still through the entire arc, the U.S. has consistently supported the idea of a two-state solution to the Palestinian-Israeli problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that, to some degree, has been a hindrance, I think, because it's you're going in with this pre-baked position and not really
Right.
sitting down with the other sides and looking at
Mm-hmm.
alternatives. And I think that's what the State Department has been doing now, is to say, let's really get serious about other solutions, right?
Right.
And but that's more complicated. So getting to a solution is, and we started talking about them, disagreements over the borders, right? Like, what
Mm-hmm.
is the Palestinian state? Security, absolute security guarantee, and tangible guarantee for Israel if they're going to have a nation state that potentially could house a terrorist organization again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a huge one, probably the biggest one. The status of Jerusalem, right? As who controls that, and could we
Mm-hmm.
get to it's an international enclave and get to that point? That's hard. The
Yeah.
existing Israeli settlements, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, and on is what the pile of problems are that need to get solved. And
Mm-hmm.
this two-state solution has been the position of our allies, especially the EU and UK and Australia. And yes, some of them are starting to shift to a new strategy of saying, I'm going to recognize Palestine as a catalyst to, or a dynamic to put pressure on Israel and
Mm-hmm.
bring in, more of the international community to resolve all these challenges I just laid out, right?
Hmm.
And, that's where my kind of slimmer of hope is. I don't think recognizing Palestine was the right answer, but it is one that is evolving.
So, are there any other examples in history that we can look at when recognizing a new nation state, or is this just wholly unique?
Well, I don't know the complete history of recognizing nation states. I know,
You
Sudan,
don't?
and, in Sudan and other African, nations,
Mm-hmm.
states that have been, but if you look at the history of this from, since the fall of the Ottoman Empire, I would say that this is unique in, the challenges that it has. And, we still have other, the Greeks and the Turks and all kind of settled into their territory with their population and have nations, but we still have a lot of peoples that are adrift, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
just that this one has been very contentious and very difficult. And so I would say, in a long answer short, is this situation is unique and we still have a long way to resolution.
So there's a New York Times headline calling Spain, Norway, and Ireland's recognition of Palestine as a blow to Israel.
Hmm.
Can you explain why it's seen like that?
I think yeah, I don't know that there's much explaining needed. I mean, Hamas is a designated terrorist organization by the US, the EU, and other countries. You know, this terrorist organization attacked Israel, a sovereign nation. That terrorist organization is largely housed and protected by Palestinians in this territory, right? That they're occupying. So yeah, so Israel's saying, wait a minute, I'm being attacked by a terrorist organization. I'm going after that organization, and now you're going to reward the Palestinians by starting to recognize them as a result of this action. That's how they're looking at this from their perspective, and I think from a lot of people's perspectives to say, really?
I mean, what about people who see the opposite?
Yeah, so it was definitely a blow to Israel, and you know, I when I read I read the Spanish prime minister, some words and stuff, and some
Hmm.
of the things that further, kind of fuel the fires. Like he said, you know, that they, as part of this recognition of Palestine as a state, that they will not recognize any changes to the pre 1967 borders unless they're agreed by both parties. Well, what does that mean? This is a blow because the occupied West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip itself were part of the territory that were seized as a result of the 1967 Arab Israeli War. So
Hmm.
Spain is saying, we're not going to recognize that. We're going to go back and reset it to before that. And now we have to negotiate what is the
Territorial.
geography, right?
Hmm.
Is like just another blow and a difficult one.
So I'm not going to ask you to look into your crystal ball, but I do want to ask if majority of the EU countries come out and recognize a Palestinian state, what kind of pressure does that put on the United States?
So yeah, I definitely don't have a crystal ball on this, and yeah, definitely way too complicated. The U.S. right now, especially in an election year, is under extreme pressure around this conflict and its path, right? And we're
Hmm.
looking at months now to election, and so I mean, this is what I'm sure is the pressure for the State Department to look at a pathway to recognition, right? That was even huge, that was even floated, right? So in these final months, they are, and you see all the shuttle diplomacy with this Blinken and everybody running around trying to get what they would love, is a permanent ceasefire, right? Like,
Hmm.
okay, let's stop this and let's, gather and kind of let's figure out where do we go from here. But Israel's sitting back and saying, no, you know, I'm not going to do this again. We've done this before. And then things float back, and then Hamas reconstitutes itself and becomes a major threat, and we repeat the same story over again. So Netanyahu is basically saying, I'm going to continue until I destroy, in quotes, Hamas, because you're not going to destroy ideology, but yes, you can
Hmm.
eliminate their physical capability. And that's what he's marching to. And unfortunately, with war, civilians suffer, right?
Right.
And anyway, so the U.S. absolutely is pressure, putting pressure on Israel, trying to get this done and get to post-war, and but again, Israel standing firm, saying we're going to clear out Hamas before we have that conversation or even think about that conversation.
Right. So, lastly, I want to recenter the discussion on the people living in Palestine. Like you mentioned, the
Mhm.
citizens are the ones that kind of suffer. Does all this maneuvering between nation states actually change the conditions on the ground for anyone living there now?
No, and unfortunately, in the near term, it will likely get worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the tragedy in the matter of war. Civilians do suffer, and are they complicit in this? No, they're
Mm-hmm.
just trying to live their lives and doing the best they
Mm-hmm.
can, and then you have whatever ruling entity, whether it's a actual government or not, and they try to live their lives, right? So they're gonna continue to suffer while like I said, while Israel finishes their objective, and then they can get to a permanent ceasefire, get humanitarian aid flowing again, then things will materially change. And anyway, so it's, I think, just maybe in the final pieces of this, when Hamas is substantially degraded and Gaza is under Israeli security control, which is the only thing that they're going to, I think, allow, until post-war, negotiations. Um, that the negotiations will now include the Arabs, right? So it's not just going to be Israeli Palestine with the UN and the other players. I think the Arabs are going to be at the table in getting to a solution, and I think there will have to be clearly just major security guarantees for Israel around this, and the whole territorial conversation is going to be very, very difficult, and achieving
Mm-hmm.
peace is going to require a sustained and a coordinated effort from the local leaders, the regional stakeholders like the Arabs and others in the community, and then the international community. And yes, there's international pressure. Yes, there's a lot of focus and momentum, but we've seen with Ukraine and others that for
Right.
how long, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I really hope that we can take this tragedy and turn it into long-term peace,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll hold on to that hope.
Well, that was a tough topic, wasn't
Yes, it
it?
is a very tough topic.
Oh, thank you for joining me, Bruce.
Yeah.
And of course, thank you to you all so much for listening in. Please visit the World Trade Center Institute online at WTCI.org for more insights, events, and opportunities. And make sure to follow us on all social channels at WTC Institute. See you next week.